Thank you so much, everybody, for joining this webinar organized by MedBoard, as well with collaboration with Katylistic and ABHI. I have the pleasure as well to do this webinar with Katharina and Steve. Katharina will work with me in the first slides related to the search processes, and Steve will join the panel after, related to this topic. So thank you so much, Katharina, for being with us. It's a pleasure, obviously, to do another webinar with you and share knowledge and so on. So welcome back, and I hope we can provide a very good overview about this topic.
I'm sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so just to start, obviously the main topic here is how to streamline search processes for clinical evaluation, PMS and PMCF. Obviously, it's about maximizing productivity. So we're going to try to look into those processes, but as well, we're going to look into have open panel discussions with Steve that works in terms of a lot of insights with authorities and so on. So it can give you a different perspective. I think is very important for these processes. So we have created an agenda. So let me show you the agenda. First, what is required, PMS, PMCF, CER, and PR searches, how to streamline those areas, the processes, how to streamline with expertise, with automation, and then we're going to discuss as well a practical use case that Katharina has prepared. And as well, we're going to have, as I mentioned before, the final panel discussion and Q&A. So let's crack on with the main topic. So why these searches are required? So that's one of the key things as well. I think is very important for everybody to keep in mind. And one of the key areas as well is to obviously to ensure the safety and performance of your products, but as well of the patients that obviously are using those products, and to prove it. So to be able to prove that anytime. But as well, Katharina, is very important when you do those specific activities is to identify risk, right? So to manage those risks and to identify new ones, to confer the new ones, and so on. So in terms of the risk management as well, identify new data, benefits, and as well to ensure continuous processes and proactive monitoring. As well, obviously to ensure compliance and regulations, but we think if we put the patients the first ones, the rest obviously it should come along. Just to emphasize, in this webinar, we're going to cover more the external sources. So obviously, in terms of the clinical evaluation, in terms of the PMCF and PMS, it could be for internal and external sources. So we're going to focus on the external sources and so on. So let's start, Katharina. So a bit of overview related to searches and related to the PMS. So what are the main takeaways as well in terms of the insights? So obviously it's a systematic and proactive process. That's one thing that we want to emphasize. But as a high level, what we should be looking into these PMS processes?
Yeah, I mean, of course, post-market surveillance covers a lot of activities. So everything that you perform as a manufacturer as soon as the device is on the market refers to post-market surveillance. But as you just mentioned, I think in this webinar, we want to focus a bit on everything that we collect from external data sources, like literature search databases, but of course also vigilance databases. And of course, especially from a literature perspective, we want to gather information about our own device for sure. We want to collect information about similar devices and benchmark devices. And also these proactive data collections can also help us to identify new relevant devices and of course also new treatments, diagnostic options, and of course also general trends. So this refers a bit more to the standard of care and the state of the art. So of course, we always want to make sure that we're aware of the standard of care, that our product is still relevant for the standard of care, and also that we identify these trends as soon as possible and that we can react in whatever way, also as a manufacturer. And as I mentioned before, of course, post-market surveillance is the umbrella term. And one aspect of post-market surveillance is PMCF, so post-market clinical follow-up, everything that is more related to the proactive data collection and also more related to the clinical aspects. And of course, these external data sources can cover many different aspects. So we have news from the market, we have information from competitors, we have adverse events, recalls from different databases, maybe also from internal databases from a manufacturer. And then, of course, we also want to keep track of approvals of new devices, any changes in the regulations. So also all the news relevant for regulatory aspects and new standards, guidance documents. That's also everything that should be covered under post-market surveillance. And of course, the internal data sources as well, but that's a bit out of scope, at least for this webinar.
Yes, and you're highlighting as well guidance and regulations, and that's very important thing, because regulations and guidance, they are risk controls that they are obviously shared by authorities. So if they say this, be careful, this specific device, we should, or you should show me this specific data, is something that you should be aware to incorporate in your PMS.
Correct. And also for these kind of activities, it's really important that you also have a systematic process. So I think meanwhile, everyone has a systematic process for literature searches, but to keep track of all these new guidance documents and standards, I think at least for some manufacturers, there are maybe some people who take care of it, but not really in a systematic way. So I think it's also important to have this in mind, that it's something that you have to do in a systematic and continuous way.
And we highlighted, or we put in bold, systematic, proactive, and continuous in those slides. This is something that we will highlight later on. This is very important concepts that every manufacturer, every professional should take care of. So obviously for external sources, mainly are markets and vigilance information, as well regulatory information. You mentioned PMCF as well. I included as well the PMPF, so for IVD. So what we're talking today is for medical devices, but as well for IVD devices. So both are covering this. So then PMCF, what it does, or the process is more looking into clinical data, right? So it's a PMS focus solely in clinical data.
Yeah, right. So there, the data sources are slightly different to all these reactive data collections. So of course, we also have literature reviews, but we also want to proactively take a look at data sources that cover information about new and ongoing clinical trials, any kind of PMCF studies. Registries have become super important, especially for implantable devices. And also related to the standard of care, of course, we also want to keep track of any new clinical guidance documents or recommendations from medical societies. And I think what we can already see on this slide, and also when we take a closer look at the different articles in the MDR that talk about post-market surveillance and post-market clinical follow-up, is that, of course, there are many different interactions, and also literature searches are mentioned as part of the PMS process, but of course, they're also an integral part of PMCF. So I think it's important to have this interaction in mind and to avoid any duplicate work, especially as a manufacturer.
So for the audience, what is very important is in the PMCF, mainly you are looking for clinical data. So based on the subject devices, based on similar devices, or depending obviously on the different activities. Then in terms of the CR, PR, we look again into literature. And again, we highlighted systematic, plan continuously, obviously would be proactively as well. So those three processes, they have the same keywords used in policies and regulations. So could you give us a bit of more insights as well, what differentiates from the PMCF, and as well in terms of what different type of search queries are you going to cover into different aspects?
Yeah, so I mean, the clinical evaluation is really also a whole process. So many people say clinical evaluation when they talk about the report, but actually it's really a process and not only a document. And I usually see it as the place where every information that we collect for our own device, but also from other devices, where we bring all this together and evaluate the whole picture. So we have different aspects, and in the clinical evaluation, we want to take everything into account and draw our conclusions. So of course, all the information that we collect during PMS and PMCF, they are part of the clinical evaluation. And of course, for the clinical evaluation, I also have to quantify all this information. So in terms of performance, safety, and benefits, I have to make quantifications not only for my own device, but also for similar and benchmark devices. And of course, I also have kind of a narrative part where I have to describe the medical conditions, the standard of care, and alternative treatments. So I think usually when you structure your PMS and PMCF literature searches in the right way, you don't necessarily have to perform a new search for the clinical evaluation, because actually you can structure it in a way that you already gather all the information for the CER. But of course, for the clinical evaluation, we want to make sure that we have searches that are dedicated to our own device, to similar or benchmark devices, to the medical background and clinical practice, and of course also to different kind of guidelines, recommendations from medical societies.
And one of the key things that you said as well is this is not a report, this is a process. And probably that's one of the reasons why authorities or policymakers, they are in proactively, continuously. I remember myself 15 years ago when I was doing these activities, and it was a task of just doing a few searches, putting a report, done, I see you in 2 years, right? So now the authorities, they are emphasizing, or the regulators, more into this continuous, systematic, and proactive. Now, we wanted to show you as well how, in terms of streamlining and, the insights that Katharina shared, some of the searches are actually overlapping into those processes. And sometimes if the communication is not well, during within the company or within the subcontractors you use, you may actually be doing the same searches in a different way and get different type of results and different type of reviews. So we structured this into the 3 big blocks: the clinical literature that we covered before, market and vigilance, and regulatory updates. What we can see very clearly in here is from the literature, these days, you need to do it for PMS and PSUR, obviously depending on the class, PMCF and PMPF, for scientific validity and, other factors, and obviously for the clinical evaluation and performance evaluation. So obviously for the PMCF, it fits into the PMS process. But we see as well in here, Katharina, like some overlap in that. I think everybody is feeling like I'm doing these searches, and if we are not careful, we are doing the same or different searches or different processes for different reports without actually interacting.
Yeah, I think that's one of the main issues that many manufacturers have at the moment. So of course, we have more stringent and more extensive requirements when it comes to medical devices. And of course, it's a huge burden to medical device manufacturers. But I think there are still several aspects where you can streamline the work and avoid duplicate work when you really think about, okay, what kind of data sources do I need? What kind of searches do I have to perform? And how can I bring them together? And how can I avoid too much work that maybe, or in most cases, results more or less in the same information that I have to bring together in the end. And of course,
what we say here is from the policies, what they're expecting to manufacturers to do clinical searches, market and vigilance, regulatory updates, and depending the report that you are producing, whether it's a PMS, PMCF, clinical evaluation, you need to feed those searches into those different areas. We also include internal sources. We don't cover in this webinar, but as well, just you have those dotted lines just to emphasize where it goes. As well, the PMS links obviously to the clinical evaluation. And after all the PMS, PMCF, clinical evaluation, I'm pretty sure the audience knows there are checkpoints that link to the risk management, right? Because the activity here, in terms of what we cover, the main objective, ensure the patient safety, ensure the safety and performance, is through risk management to understand the benefit risk hasn't changed or is not changed, or when you put in the market, it hasn't changed, right? So one of the key things, from this slide is understanding how these processes, or with a high level, to simplify as well how they connect together. I wanted to add as well regulatory intelligence, because people will say, well, I need to do regulatory intelligence in my company. Yes, and that's part of the PMS as well. So if you're doing different one for PMS and another for regulatory intelligence, or if you can reuse them, obviously you're going to save a lot of time, and then you can just produce the PMS based on that. And then as well, you can use that for the management review. So you can actually have multiple uses based on those searches. So from your perspective, Katharina, in terms of the workflow, what are the key challenges as well in terms of the searches and how they link into the risk management?
So I think first of all, you need to make sure that in case you have different teams, especially for larger manufacturers, of course, you sometimes have a dedicated PMS team, a dedicated PMCF team, and a dedicated clinical evaluation team. So you have to make sure that they interact and that they communicate what kind of activities they do. And for the connection to risk management, I think it's very important that you also have this in your procedures. So you need a process for this. And that's also something that especially notified bodies focus at the moment in their audits. So they want to see what kind of data you get from PMS and your clinical evaluation, how you evaluate this information, and how it fits into risk management. So you need to have a process in place in case you identify a new risk in the literature or you identify any trend in the frequency of risks in literature or in different other data sources. Then you need a process how to react on this. And I think that's one of the really nice things that have improved now with the MDR. So this interconnection between different teams, and also that you can really see, okay, there is a purpose or a reason why we do this. It's not only because we have to do it, it's also because it helps us to improve our medical devices on the market.
And what we see as well is for the streamlining, obviously we need to understand how the workflows across the organization work. Transparency is key, as you mentioned before. So understanding who is doing what and what type of searches as well, whether using subcontractors, okay, what are the searches, how that fits in the bigger scheme. But as well, in order to simplify, one of the key things as well we think is to always to have the same process for searches and systematic reviews. And regardless whether we're doing clinical literature, market and vigilance, and regulatory updates, for all of them, I require these 5 steps. And sometimes, traditionally, as you mentioned, this is more established for literature. But one of the key things as well for PMS and regulatory intelligence, or in terms of monitoring the updates, it's important to have a structured way. So we wanted to cover as well the plan. You mentioned as well during the preparation how important it is to define the data to be collected, define the specific sources to be searched and the frequency, define the queries or search terms to be searched, and as well how you're going to review it. This is one of the areas I see there are more gaps. People don't have they have it for literature, and I think that's through the feedback through Notify and so on there has improved massively. But in terms of for example, PMS and other activities, maybe that's not that well established. So you have an update, whether it's relevant, not relevant, whether the risk identified there, you have it or not have it. So all of this has to be in a form. It has to be in a structured process. So one of the things that for you are very important and expertise, Katharina, is the plan. So the plan obviously is where the expertise goes, is going to define the intent. And as well, obviously, it's going to define, how good or bad is going to be the review of those specific or that specific data. So one of the, from our side, we want to the plan collection, executing searches according to the plan, organizing results in structured databases. That's a bit of a pain. So it's not only searching. I think people forget sometimes you need to search, but then you use different sources. They come with different columns, and then you need to put them together, right? So Katharina, I think you have a lot of experience with this. So that's a pain, especially with dealing with a lot of sources. Yeah,
that's true. But also from my experience, I also want to highlight again the importance of the plan. I mean, not only because notified bodies want you to have a plan, but also from an organizational perspective. So I had several situations where I was involved in a project as a consultant, and actually no one was able to to tell me how previous searches or previous appraisals have been done, because sometimes you have, especially for small manufacturers, there was maybe only one person taking care of these activities, and then the person leaves the company, and then no one knows how to continue with the searches. So also from this organizational perspective, it's just very important to really have a detailed plan to make things reproducible and also to allow a continuous literature search or any other database search process.
And that's not only like risk mitigation, right, as a company,
Yep.
but as well as streamlining searches, because the transition period, you don't waste resources to understanding how it was done previously, whether that person did it in a specific way. And I think that, back, to my times like 10, 15 years ago, that's it used to be. The plan was searching, and then in the results, you just were putting which sources, what were the results, but there was nothing traditionally on the plan. And that was not as well a specific requirement from authorities to see that explicitly as well. In terms of the systematic reviews, obviously, and again, that's what we emphasize in plan, because in the systematic review, whether you're doing literature, reviewing clinical trials, reviewing PMS vigilance, reviewing market news, reviewing regulatory intelligence, you need to triage those items according to the appraisal plan. You need to do the full analysis of relevant items according to the appraisal plan, and you need to extract those conclusions according to your scope and plan. So obviously for the reporting, there will be, depending on the goal, you may have different type of data that you need to highlight or different type of appraisal plans. So that's what is going to make different, right? So you have the same process that you can use across all those different, because if we look at the specific functions or steps are exactly the same. What it changes is the goal, the forms, how you review the data. So one of the key things that we feel that it will streamline very much into, with professionals, manufacturers, is regardless what you're doing, is literature, is markets, updates, or you have the same process or at least the same steps. So then it's much easier to train, it's much easier to transfer, as Katharina said, and it's much easier as well to identify any potential gains or improvements, because obviously if you identify the problem is the searches have not done accordingly, then that's a corrective, action in that area. So I don't know, Katharina, you want to add more into these slides? We just wanted to show that this is one of the key areas as well to streamline, especially to have in a procedure as well, to have it as well very well specified. But if a company can do this across the board for all the collection, searches, and reviewing, that will be obviously much well implemented and effective as well.
Yeah. Maybe just one more comment about the appraisal. So I really think it makes sense to spend some time thinking about a good appraisal method for different data sources, because I often see that people just select the most commonly used way to appraise the data source, but in the end, then you have maybe a table with different codes and that don't really give you some relevant information. So I think it really makes sense to spend a little bit of time on having a good appraisal approach, and also maybe to have different appraisal approaches for different data sources. So this definitely makes sense.
And that will make the difference as well from a great expert like you creating a great plan and implemented that with really nice output to another professional that with that experience that maybe is not implemented to what is expected from authorities. So the expertise, you can have automations, you can have data science, AI, but the plan is very critical to get that involvement with an expert.
Yeah, I agree.
So, Katharina, from your side, so we're talking now about expertise, right? How to streamline. So, share with us what are the key areas that you think, from when you face these searches, what are you looking into, for streamlining those searches?
Yeah. So I think some of the things we already covered. So I think we already highlighted the different or the interactions between clinical evaluation, post-market surveillance, PMCF. So I always try to get a clear picture of all the different data sources, of my search queries, of the scope of the search. And then I think about, okay, how can I use this information maybe also for other purposes, and how can I streamline the information? So I often try to have just one literature search approach that really covers everything I need for the clinical evaluation, PMS and PMCF. And also when you do literature searches, I always try to also have other things in mind. So for example, maybe there's a new development project at the manufacturer, or there's a plan for PMCF investigations where you might need some statistics regarding the endpoints. And in most of the cases, you can use the literature searches that you've already done for different purposes to get your statistics for your PMCF study, or to retrieve information for the medical background for a new development project. So I always try to get a good overview of everything that is going on, and then you also have the chance to streamline the activities and reuse searches whenever possible.
So it would be a combination of reusing, having the steps defined, streamlining through automation, through different type of steps that you can, or you have as well, those mechanisms already, very well defined, in your head. And in terms of the expertise, what is the first thing you do when you face a project with a lot of searches? So what is the advice you give to the audience? To what is the first thing to do when you have all those searches?
So first of all, I think it's important to know the scope of all these searches. So what's the purpose of them? What's the main information that I want to retrieve from all these searches? So I usually try to go a few steps further. What kind of information do I need, and how do I get this information? And then you can see if it's really necessary to have, 15 different search strings in many different databases, or if you can reduce the number of search strings for different purposes and align them. So I think, the scope and the purpose of these activities is the first thing I have to know, and then I can adapt the protocols.
Mm-hmm. So we talk about the expertise, and obviously now, since we have automations and different type of technologies, that can help a lot of experts. We say like the plan is mainly has to be produced by the expert, with that expertise, that intent, understanding as well the expectations from authorities. But one of the challenges we see, and again, if I look back my career 10, 15 years ago, the updates compared to now, the difference is massive, right? So the main problem to implement all these searches, right, and to implement all these nice workflows is there are too many updates and too many collections to do from many sources. And everything is increasing, and we don't see as well decreasing. The other thing is, we have been highlighting in this presentation keywords like continuous, proactive, systematic. So how that can be achieved manually, unless you as a professional, you spend your days just doing that manually, which most of the professionals, they work in this. We can do a poll here whether anyone it was the main objective in their life to just been doing searches and being in websites when they sign up to work in life sciences. So I think that most of us, we don't want to spend time in those type of activities. So obviously, to have continuous, proactive, and systematic, and to ensure that it is collectively working, is very unlikely to do that manually. So that's something that we see as well from our side. And as well, plus having a structure organized and repeatable. As you said as well, if someone is new in the company, or that is transferred to another person within the same organization, that person should have the data structure organized and repeatable. And that's quite difficult to know. And this happened to me, back in the days working in manufacturers. Like, okay, who did the first or the previous search? Yeah, I went there, these the searches. But then I don't know how those searches were done, how in these conditions, which day it was executed, and so on. So, my main question I always ask is like, do professionals want and can actually do this manually? And there are always exceptions, right? So that's why I put 99%. There will be somebody that maybe say, oh yeah, that's what I want to do, a lot of searches. But obviously most of us, we just want to spend our time in value-added task. And we will talk about that later, but being placed in a specific task that adds value or are more aligned to the intent increases massively the job satisfaction of that person. And we've seen as well with our customers or potential customers, or some other companies, people saying, okay, if I don't use this type of automations, I don't want to I didn't do a PhD to actually be doing these searches and repeated searches or in an Excel copy and pasting. So I wanted to highlight as well that the extent, as Katharina said, is not about your product, it's as well as about your product type. So what are the trends in your product type, but as well in terms of the sector, the general and clinical market trends. So that's a lot to combine for one person. And to, as a humans, we always have busier weeks. So it's quite unpredictable to have one person that is like a machine searching, reviewing, and so on. So we need other systems. What we obviously from MedBoard we implementing is trusted global data that we look into all those sources, vigilance, literature, regulatory updates globally for 225 countries, software solutions, and I will highlight this with customizable workflows. And that's the key, because if Katharina does a really good plan, any software in automation has to enable that plan, because the systems, they need to adapt as well to the expert, not the other way around, the expert to the software as well. In terms of data intelligence and artificial intelligence, these solutions, they can streamline, but as well they can allow to obviously clean the information, have other metadata, but extract information much faster. And we've seen that so many gains in terms of this area. So what are the key takeaways as well for from my side that we've been working with a lot of manufacturers is, first, you can do faster and more efficient searches. And so you can execute from multiple sources instantly and integrate those results. And I will highlight integrate. People sometimes forget it's not about only searching, but as well putting everything into just one big table or whatever is the format, to have a format that you can review results. Higher data quality and accuracy. Obviously, if it's clean, it's up to date, and the data is structured, you will have more chances as well to review that. Just to emphasize, some authorities, some websites, they don't allow even to do a search. So you will be using the Chrome, search bar, and obviously that's not ideal for any professional. Continuous and systematic monitor reviews, so searching continuously, inputs and outputs instead of periodic manual efforts. Again, we see as well, like, people are procrastinating, like, oh, again, I used to do that. Oh, I need to do these searches. And you always find something more interesting than actually going to 10 websites to do searches, right? And obviously real-time alerts, and it's more proactive. And that's one of the key areas of proactive. How can you be proactive? It depends on you to do searches, somewhere. Obviously, the systematic review is embedded within the workflow, so according to the plan. And again, this is very important because, from your perspective as well, Katharina, if you have something that doesn't align with you as an expert, you can defend with a notified variant authority. That's not going to be of use, and then you're not going to feel comfortable about that. And then the last two, where we see a lot of streamlined processes, is facilitates the traceability documentation for regulatory submissions and data integrity. And we will make some emphasis with Steve later as well, that you should be able, or you will be able to report information instantly. And when you have disparate searches in an Excel, review in other places, it could be quite challenging to do that. And as well, Katharina mentioned already, team and effort, company effort rather than individual. So it's recorded and as well it's transferable. So you can transfer that, you just need to follow a process and so on. And most important, I think, the productivity gain. So it's just remove the manual and place the professional in the planning and review steps. That is where the professional can add much more value in terms of applying the knowledge and experience, reducing time, cost and resources, especially manual research, data cleaning, review, and reporting. And on top, as I mentioned before, the AI can help massively to extract relevant data and insights. And just to align with what we've been discussing with Katharina, is this is the results from our survey as well. When we did it, is faster processes, improve quality and consistency. And what I'm most proud, when we share this, improve job satisfaction. So that means that people are feeling, I'm doing actually what I should be doing instead of doing these repeated searches and so on. I think like Katharina, obviously you use automations and different type of technology. So does this align as well with what you're experiencing as well on top of your expertise?
Yeah, definitely. So I also made the experience that the more manual work you have to do, the more often you really lose the oversight of what you're actually doing. So I had this really in several projects where I had to do a lot of manual work in terms of creating tables in a manual way, adding appraisal data in a manual way. And all this stuff took so much time and effort and was also just tiring that in the end, I wasn't really sure what I did during all these hours that I spent on a literature search. And I think when you really reduce the efforts for these manual searches, you have more the chance to really think about, okay, what am I actually doing? What kind of data do I get? And what kind of conclusions can I draw from this data analysis? So yeah, I totally agree.
Yes, actually, you made me think that we've been transferring a lot of systematic literature reviews from Excel to our system in MedBoard, right? And then obviously the professional, they did with the best intention, but when transferring to a structured database like MedBoard, they realized, oh, actually I missed that, or actually I duplicated that. So obviously, when add many different manual steps, the probability of making an undesirable mistake is there as well.
Yeah, for sure.
You wanted to share as well a practical use case related to manufacture single implantable device. So just could you share with us, how different type of what was the situation and how do you solve it?
Yeah, so I thought it would be nice to also share a practical example because we talked a lot about streamlining. So I think it's one of the examples that nicely shows how you can simplify the work. So in this case study, I collaborated with a manufacturer who just developed the first implantable device. And I think they had good processes, but somehow they developed separate literature searches. First of all, of course, for the clinical evaluation. So in this case, they did one comprehensive search per year. Then they also had a different search strategy for PMCF with a slightly different scope. And this search was performed 2 times per year, a bit more focused just on the subject device and similar devices. And then, of course, they also had their PMS team. They also did 2 searches, and their focus was a bit more on the market research. But in the end, when you looked at the different search terms, then there was a huge overlap. And the biggest problem was that all these searches were performed at different timeframes. So in the end, for the clinical evaluation, where you had to bring all this information together, it also required a lot of manual work to detect any duplicated information and to bring this all together. And also at the same time, the manufacturer performed another systematic literature search for statistical purposes. So they were currently working on the extension of the indication and needed some literature information for the statistics for a clinical investigation. So the main issue for this manufacturers was they had many different searches with a slightly different scope at different time periods. And this made it super difficult to organize the data for the clinical evaluation. And so the solution was then to really develop one standalone literature search protocol that really covered all the aspects that are relevant for CR, PMCF, and PMS. And all these results were then also summarized in a standalone literature search report. So this has the advantage that you can refer to your protocol from the different PMS, PMCF plans and the CP. And you can also refer to the literature search report, also for your PMCF report, the PSUR and the CR. So we had 2 new data sources, but they streamlined all the information that came from the literature search. And also at the same time, the literature search was extended to also cover this new relevant information for the clinical investigation to allow for a state-of-the-art evaluation. And in this way, they really were able to streamline their efforts and to avoid any duplicate information. And I think this was a really nice way, to avoid duplicate work and to reduce work efforts and also unnecessary manual work.
So it feels that was a solution not only for that moment, but for the following years. Because once that you have a good plan and a good process, it's just following that process, right? So it feels like solving that problem is not a problem you need to solve every year.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so this was all with the focus on the continuous process for the clinical evaluation and PMS. Yeah.
And then obviously for the automations that Katharina mentioned, like PMS, obviously if you have created a plan and then for one search you can execute 40 countries with, more than 200,000 field safety corrective actions, adverse events. So that obviously accelerates massively the execution of the plan. One of the things as well in terms of automation related to examples like this are that multiple literature searches are automatically by field and integrated regardless to the source. And that's always a pain, especially if you look into different sources, and as well that the appraisal plan is embedded with results. So you can do multiple reportings, even if you have the same data, because you can use different type of appraisal plans or different type of questions, obviously, to do multiple reporting or filter by specific data or filter by specific dates or filter as well by any metadata that you have created as well, or by any results that you have in those questions. So obviously, again, we wanted to emphasize that this is not one solution that experts could solve everything, with the volume of work that is happening, or the automations or technology platforms like MedBoard can do everything on their own. Actually, we need to coexist, and it's more like a like human technology integration rather than actually just one side, to do everything. And then for our side, before we go to the panel, we want to emphasize as well, we are working, or we are releasing actually next week, more automations coming to March. So we are releasing a GenAI assistant to extract even information much faster with systematic reviews, inquiry, and write faster. We're releasing as well a citation app in the Word to write faster as well the reports and organize references, and as well to reference a reference manager where the folders can be organized and as well is connected to the citation app. So again, we are looking to reduce the steps that people need to connect with one place to another, and as well the GenAI assistant, it helps massively. You can request the data related to a PICO, create a table. It's just mind-blowing in many ways, in terms of PDFs and updates. So, and now we're going to go to the panel discussion and Q&A. Now we're going to invite Steve to join the discussion. And one of the key things as well, thank you, Steve, for joining. I can see you. Are you there?
I'm here.
Yeah. Okay. I cannot see you, but I can hear you. So that's very good. Thank you so much, Steve.
That's the better option.
Say again, sorry.
Hearing me but not seeing me is the better deal.
No, we can see you now. We can see you now.
Okay.
I would say, like, obviously, Steve from other webinars we've done together. Pretty sure as well, him from the industry. He's an expert in as well in policy making as well and interacting with authorities. So we wanted to build as well this discussion into what actually authorities are looking into when you build these searches, when you actually do these activities. What is the end goal? So I have one first question to you, Steve, like, what the authorities are looking for? What is the intent as well in recent PMS specific regulations that we are seeing for the first time?
So my background is working with a regulator, but it was probably a few years ago. So things change quite a lot. But looking at just general principles, there are people within regulators who are focused on post-market surveillance, on looking at post-market surveillance reports, and their number one priority, absolute number one priority, is patient safety. That's usually aligned with a political objective as well. So making sure that the health minister doesn't have another health scare on their watch. So they are absolutely focused on patient safety. There aren't that many figures numbers of reports recently, but I believe China has received around 500,000 reports per year. A few years ago, when I was at MHRA, it was about 10,000 reports per year. That's probably increased hugely since then. And I don't know how many in the US. So hundreds of thousands of reports every year, spread across the globe. A lot of those are from manufacturers through vigilance reporting, but many of those are from users. And all of those reports need to be documented. They need to be put into a database. They need to be coded. They need to have some kind of assessment done on them, and they need to be analysed for trends and for signals. So the regulator might come straight to you and say, "Oh, I found a signal." You have no warning of that. Then you have to be able to respond to that immediately because of the political pressure and the patient safety pressure. You need to be able to respond to that immediately. So a lot of the work that yourself and Katharina have just described, and a lot of the methodology and systematization is going to be really, really helpful to allow you to answer that. For some incidents, there's going to be a full-blown investigation, and the regulator is going to be looking at not just the report from yourself or from the user. They're going to be looking at a whole load of other databases, expert opinions, clinicians, and they're going to find a whole lot, and they'll also be going to the conformity assessment body, saying, well, how has this manufacturer been working with you in terms of their vigilance reporting procedures, their post-market surveillance procedures? Are they generally compliant, or are there any concerns about these products? And that could be huge, loads and loads of questions that you weren't prepared for. But if I think you're taking the methodical approach that Ivan and Katharina, you've been just describing, that will maybe give you a better chance of being able to answer those questions in the timescales available. What I'm sure I don't want is to not get the reassurance they need in the timescales they're looking at. So no response, or a bland response is really not helpful. A really focused and detailed response is exactly what they'll be looking for.
So in terms of risk mitigation, right, in terms of like companies, this having a streamlined searches, clear searches, very well documented, recorded searches, obviously it's going to help the regulator as well, any other stakeholder involved, to understand how that was performed, what was the evaluation, and what was the outcomes with the information that company had in their hands in terms of the knowledge. So obviously you're asking, like, you're saying how important it is to have to do reporting very quickly in case you are inquired, right? So that's important in terms of all the processes that we described, Katharina and myself as well. But what as well, like, this could be very important as well for the audience, what mechanisms as well the regulators they use, or what they're looking for as well when they look into this type of information when something happened.
So it's basically safety and performance, isn't it? I mean, I think that yes, regulatory compliance is going to be really important to certain to the compliance folks in regulators, but for the post-market surveillance folks, it's safety and performance. So how many incidents have you had? How many products have you sold? What are the number of uses of that product? And what is state of the art in terms of performance for that product? And do you continue to meet it?
And you mentioned signals, but could you expand as well on what is the global data exchange? That is a concept that has been raised before. So how that works within, between authorities as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about some small states don't have the regulatory resource to do all of these investigations, so they're relying on data exchange from others. There's hundreds of thousands of reports every year. The outputs from those have all been coded in a database. So, if they're using the IMDRF coding and using the IMDRF format for data exchange, it means that kind of those small states can act for their constituents quite quickly without having to have that loads of resource. It also allowed, looking back even to a webinar we did a few weeks ago, recognition and reliance. By having that data exchange around post-market surveillance, it means that recognition and reliance can be put into place. Without that data exchange, it's really, really difficult to do recognition and reliance. So post-market surveillance, exchange of data between authorities on post-market surveillance on signals is something which is essential for our industry, really.
So, and that aligns with, what Katharina, you've been saying about notified bodies to, expecting to have more prescriptive or more explicit information or data related to how that's been performed, what is the PMS information and clinical evaluation, PMCFs. One question for you, like, what are the key main challenges in searches and reviews when you look at the whole process in order to meet those expectations from, helping manufacturers?
So you mean the key challenges from a manufacturer's perspective?
No, from yourself when you are going through these processes in terms of like searches and because for a manufacturer could be a much bigger issue depending on what they have.
Yeah, I think mainly to have this information in a really clearly structured way. So what you also just mentioned is that it has become super important to be able to really quickly react to any inquiries or questions from the notified body or any other authority. And I remember, it was only a few years ago when we had a request from a notified body, then we had maybe 1 or 2 weeks to perform literature searches again to try to find the information for a very particular question. And I think when you have all the information structured, for example, in a database, you can just have one inquiry about a performance aspect, a safety aspect, and then you have this information maybe in 5 minutes and you don't have to put 3 or 4 people together trying to manually extract the information. So I think a really good structured way to organize everything and to make it accessible, that's the main challenge.
And it's one of the challenges as well to understand the expectations from regulators that sometimes, obviously for MDR, IVDR, it took us like several years to understand what actually they were looking for in the report of the formats. So that's one question for you, Katharina. And after, what are the efforts from authorities or international regulators to add more clarity in this aspect?
Yeah, so I think at least from my perspective, this definitely has improved. So, a few years ago, we were all totally overwhelmed by the new regulations. We didn't know what was expected. But I think both for PMS, PMCF, and the CR, it's clear that the focus is always on performance, safety, and benefits, and the identification of risks. And then, of course, also the interaction between the different data sources and the quantification. But I think this really now has become quite clear to everyone who's working in the regulatory field.
And from your side, Steve, do you think that regulators should put more emphasis and for manufacturers to learn or professionals quicker what are the expectations as well?
Yeah, I think the kind of the pendulum has swung slightly the other way now, and instead of the regulator saying I have enough evidence to say your device is unsafe, there's a lot more emphasis on the manufacturer saying no, I have a sufficient evidence to say that my device is safe and performs as intended. And it's not just the regulator, it's not just the competent authority, it's also the conformity assessment body, the notified body, and the approved body. They're also kind of being in a very mechanical way, going through the regulatory compliance and expecting you to be able to provide that information up front, so they can answer the questions when the competent authority asks the notified body, well, what are you doing about it? They also need to have a ready answer.
So the data transfer, what we're looking in these systems is it should be fast to communicate, obviously when there is a signal, but as well between the different stakeholders. There is a question from Vasilis. Thank you so much. Once the search terms are established, are we able to edit and continue the search over the years? I think this could be for both Katharina and myself. From my side, I will give you my answer from my side. You can edit, yes, but then it means that you are retrospectively searching for those. So obviously, editing queries is not only one thing that you should be doing if you identify new risk, new competitors, new specific keywords that can be added. But if you are talking specific about the platform, obviously it's going to retrieve all the results that they were from previous years, depending on how you search it. But Katharina, from your side, would you create a new search based on the new keywords and having like a separate like results, or how would you deal with that?
So I think there's not really a black or white. So, I mean, it's always important to document it. So, of course, I need to update my literature search plan. And usually I also include a rationale why I made this decision. And I mean, in general, I think there's always a need to adapt and redefine your literature searches. So sometimes you cover new aspects within a search, then you realize, okay, maybe I missed this information and it makes sense to add it. Or you realize that you maybe missed one relevant publication, then you also have to think about, okay, why did I miss it? Should I include another data source? Did I miss a search term? But it's always important to document it in the plan.
Yeah, so the same from this day, actually, we are editing and we are adding more keywords to the, and then it's all documented based on those results. And as well, if there is any risk identification, something big happened, in terms of missing, obviously to do a retrospective search. So I think I hope that answers your question, Basil. There's another question for you, like, should the SOTA literature search have his own literature search protocol separate to the device under evaluation?
Yeah, so I know that some manufacturers do it. I sometimes find it a bit difficult to really clearly differentiate between this is SOTA and this is the subject device. So I think you often have the situation that a search string that is more relevant to the SOTA reveals something that is relevant for your own device and vice versa. So I usually have it all in one protocol, but just define different subsections. But I want to make sure that I have a comprehensive picture and that I can use one information from one search string, maybe also for other purposes. So I usually have it in one, but of course, it's also not a mistake to have a dedicated protocol.
So again, it depends on the expertise and the context of the organization, how they approach those as well. It could be as well the feedback from notified bodies. There is an important question about search that Basil as well had. Is related to whether Google Scholar, the literature searches can be searched and detailed timeframes more than per year. One thing that we haven't said, but I think it is very important for people to understand, is different databases. They have different fields that can be searched. And I see sometimes posts, these keywords are not coming up. There are many less results in PubMed and in PMC PubMed or PMC Europe, of course, because in PMC you are actually looking in the full text, and the PubMed you are not. You are only looking in the title and the abstract. So, Katharina, that's very important as well to put in the protocol, on the plan, to understand. Okay, these databases are, they allow us to search in these specific fields, because for an authority or maybe they don't know that much about those databases. It's important to document as well which areas are searchable as well.
Yeah, correct.
Could we in the last minute or so look at the IVD questions?
Yes. Which one do you want to pick as well?
I think there's generally uncertainty around whether this applies to IVDs or not. And I would say, the methods and the systems that Katharina and Ivan you've been describing will apply to IVDs. Absolutely. There are some key differences, of course. The definition of benefit and the definition of harm is different, but the way in which you assess those is very, very similar. You're looking at numerical performance indicators, so sensitivity, specificity. It's very difficult to determine whether it's a false result or a discrepant result. And sometimes it's difficult to understand whether it's the reagent on the platform. But in general, there's the methods that you've described are absolutely applicable to IVDs. I would say in addition, you've got things like proficiency testing and EQA, which you should be adding into your knowledge about the performance of the device, because they will give you a comparative performance compared to other similar products in the field, and that can be an invaluable source of information about performance in the post-market phase.
Yes, and that's a great point. So everything that we talk today is transferable to the IVDs. Obviously, as Steve said, depending on the knowledge and the expertise, obviously you need to look into the scientific validity, other different type of information. But all of these processes are as well transferable to IVD. We are arriving to the end of the webinar. I know there are other questions. Anyone can send as well to the questions to ourselves. We're happy to respond to them. But obviously, I want to just give you the the opportunity for Katharina, Steve, last words, related to, what are the, what is your, in terms of like, hopes in terms of the PMS, more clinical evaluation processes, what is your ideal scenario moving forward for the industry?
So from my perspective, and I also think I already mentioned it, I really hope that more people really realize the benefit of what we're doing when we do this systematic and continuous searches, and also the proactive data collection, because I now really had several examples that clearly showed that you can improve the performance and the safety of your medical device when you do all this. And that it's not only just a regulatory burden that keeps us busy, but really that there's a purpose behind it. That's just from my perspective.
Oh yeah, I would fully agree with you, Katharina. I think that that a robust and effective post-market surveillance system that is focused on patient safety as well as regulatory compliance is really, really important. It means that people consider our industry to be trustworthy. And that's good for patients, and that's good for the economic growth as well. So get on with that post-market surveillance. Make sure you've got all that data. Make sure you've got all those methods. Make sure you've got that systematized methodological approach that both you and Ivan have described so well here.
And as well, just to add on top of, when you have simplified processes, it's much easier as well to implement those processes. And this is one of the key messages that we wanted to give as well, because one of the key things with literature, PMS, all these processes, so the data can move faster between or inside of the company, but as well across, different stakeholders. And if in the future, obviously, this information is more transferable, faster, the information can be obviously acquired much faster, then we are going to be closer to a much better patient safety. So we don't need to wait until something very bad happens, or identify opportunities as well there. So having these data processes very well established, proactively, systematic, and so on, obviously that would be very essential. So thank you so much for your time, Katharina and Steve. I really appreciate, it's always a pleasure to spend time with you with this webinar. If any question, we will send the details as always, for Katharina and Steve. You can contact them for any questions. Sure. Just to say, obviously, big thank you to both. Thank you for everybody that has attended this webinar. We will upload the video. And as well, thank you for watching. Keep an eye as well on our developments as we're releasing a very great things as well very soon. So thank you so much for your time. I hope you enjoy it. And I see you very soon as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
It was a pleasure. See you soon.